This signaling occurs with proteins and other types of signaling molecules. And scientists believe that people with schizophrenia have an imbalance of brain chemicals or neurotransmitters. And these include dopamine, glutamate, and serotonin. These neurotransmitters allow nerve cells in the brain to send messages to each other. And the imbalance of these chemicals affects the way a person's brain reacts to stimuli, which explains why a person with schizophrenia may not react to sensory information like we do. And they have a problem processing different sounds, sights, and smells and tastes, and this can lead to hallucinations and delusions.
In both local and long-distance signaling, only specific target cells recognize and respond to given signaling molecule. Local signaling includes paraffin signaling, which is a secreting cell acts on nearby target cells by discharging molecules of local regulator into the extracellular fluid. And synaptic signaling is when a target cell releases neurotransmitter molecules into a synapse, stimulating the target cell. Long-distance signaling includes hormonal signaling, which is specialized endocrine cells secrete hormones into body fluids, often the blood. In plants, the plasmodesmata allows cells to communicate with neighboring cells. Plasmodesmata are open channels in the cell wall. In animals, gap junctions connect cells to neighboring cells.
The pathway along which cellular communication occurs is called the signal transduction pathway, and it's a series of cellular and molecular changes that help target cells receive a message and respond accordingly. These pathways are crucial to cellular function because they're the main mode of communication between cells. The three steps are reception, transduction, and response. First, a signaling cell secretes a signaling molecule, which then travels with its message to the cell's membrane. This is reception. This receptor protein is like the security guard at an entrance gate, and when the receptor protein security guard accepts the signaling molecule and binds to it, a relay begins, which is the second step of cell signaling called transduction. The final relay molecule activates a protein that triggers the final stage of this process called response. And the response is just what happens when all this occurs. And each response is different because it depends on the message that was carried through the cell. A ligand is a signaling molecule. And when it bonds to the receptor or receiving molecule, it changes the receptor's shape or activity, allowing it to transmit a signal or directly produce a change inside the cell.
G-protein-8 receptors are receptors that bind protein ligands, shown in figure A, and have a large extracellular domain formed by the part of the polypeptide chain. This domain, together with some of the transmembrane segments, binds the protein ligand. The dopamine G-protein receptor uses dopamine as its neurotransmitter and contributes to behaviors such as motivation and disorders such as schizophrenia. In patients with schizophrenia, the integrative centers of the brain, namely the limbic system and the cortex of the prefrontal and temporal lobes, are not functioning normally. The currently accepted hypothesis for this disturbance in function postulates that in patients with this condition, there is an overproduction of dopamine in the mesolimbic neurons that project to the limbic system and to the prefrontal cortex. A protein kinase is a kinase enzyme that modifies other proteins by chemically adding phosphate groups to them, which is called phosphorylation. Phosphorylation usually results in a functional change of the target protein or substrate by changing enzyme activity, cellular location, or association with other proteins.
In a kinase cascade, one kinase can phosphorylate multiple kinases in the next step of the signaling pathway. And the protein kinase is right here on figure A. And each of them can phosphorylate many more kinases, leading to the original signal of maybe one activated protein being turned into a huge, non-reversible chain reaction. Kinase cascades are used to amplify extracellular signals in many pathways, normally from the cell membrane receptor to the nucleus, so a cell detects an external change and changes its gene expression in response. Cyclic AMP is a second messenger used for intracellular signal transduction, such as transferring into cells the effects of hormones like glucagon and adrenaline, which cannot pass through the plasma membrane. It is also involved in the activation of protein kinases.
When a cell receives a signal, it binds to a receptor protein on the outside of the cell or inside the cell. Then the signal molecule bonds to the molecule and changes the receptor protein. This change initiates transduction. This transduction stage converts the signal to a form that can be used to produce a cellular signal. The transduction pathway is made up of many relay molecules. Lastly, the response is triggered by the signal transduction pathway. It can be various forms of response, usually cellular activity. After receiving a signal, cellular processes may be altered. Signals may cause the opening or closing of an ion channel or a change in the cell's metabolism. Some signals produce enzymes and proteins, and they help regulate enzyme activity. It does this by turning genes on or off. Malfunction of gene regulation responses, including growth factors, lead to diseases and malfunctions in genes.
There is a gene called C4, harbored in chromosome 6, which is shown in figure B, and it's involved in eliminating the connections between neurons. And this process is called synaptic pruning. And in humans, this naturally occurs in the teen years. But researchers have found that it is possible that excessive or inappropriate pruning of neural connections could lead to the development of schizophrenia, explaining why schizophrenia symptoms often first appear during the teen years. Researchers found that people with schizophrenia have a high number of spontaneous mutations in genes that form a network in the front region of the brain. These misspellings in a gene's DNA sequence occur spontaneously, and so aren't shared by their close relatives. Spontaneously mutated genes in people with schizophrenia were expressed in the prefrontal cortex, a region in front of the brain as shown in figure C, which is right here. The genes are known to be involved in important pathways in the brain development. 50 of these genes were active mainly during the period of fetal development. Processes critical for the brain's development can be revealed by mutations that disrupt them. Mutations can lead to loss of integrity of a whole pathway, not just of a single gene.
Schizophrenia is a disease that typically begins in early adulthood, between the ages of 15 and 25. Men tend to develop schizophrenia slightly earlier than women, whereas most males become ill between 16 and 25 years old. Most females develop symptoms several years later, and the incidence in women is noticeably higher in women after age 30. The average age of onset is 18 in men and 40 and 25 in women. Schizophrenia onset is quite rare for people under 10 years of age or over 40 years of age. Scientists recognize that the disorder is autosomal and that a person inherits a tendency to develop the disease. Similar to some other genetically related illnesses, schizophrenia may appear when the body undergoes hormonal and physical changes, like those that occur during puberty, or after dealing with highly stressful situations.
Many people associate hallucinations with just schizophrenia. There's also positive and negative symptoms that go along with it. And positive symptoms are disturbances that are added to the person's personality. These include delusions, and individuals may believe that someone is spying on him or her, or they think there's someone famous. Hallucinations, they're like seeing, feeling, tasting, hearing, or smelling something that is not really there, it just doesn't exist. Disordered and disorganized behavior, and this can range from having problems with routine behaviors like hygiene, or like choosing appropriate clothing for the weather. They'll have disordered thinking and speech. They'll like move from one topic to another in a nonsensical fashion, like it just doesn't make sense. They might have provoked outbursts and like impulsive, uninhibited actions. And some of the negative symptoms, these are the ones that are lost from the person's personality. And these include social withdrawal, so they're not social with people, they usually keep to themselves. Extreme apathy, so they have lack of interest. Lack of drive or initiative, and emotional flatness. And there's no cure for schizophrenia, but many people with this illness can lead productive and fulfilling lives. But they have to have the proper treatment. And recovery is possible through a variety of services, including medication and rehabilitation programs. And rehabilitation can help a person recover the confidence and skills needed to live a productive and independent life in the community.
Although some patients with schizophrenia may have a single episode and recover, the vast majority remain ill and unable to work for life. In the United States, patients with schizophrenia use 2.5% of the annual total healthcare allocations. The atypical antipsychotics, particularly when combined with psychosocial treatment, hold the promise of improving outcome and reducing the economic burden on society. With clinical outcome and cost effectiveness are both evaluated in the context of a comprehensive assessment of a range of meaningful outcome measures studied in clinical situations. Evidence exists that the atypical antipsychotics not only reduce positive and negative symptoms and cause fewer side effects than conventional neuroleptics, also lessen cognitive impairment, lead to a better quality of life, and have antidepressant effects, all of which should result in improved outcome in patients with schizophrenia.
And that concludes our presentation.
All right. Okay. So schizophrenia is considered a cell communication problem. Can you walk us through the actual breakdown of the cell communication that we find in someone with schizophrenia?
Basically, they have an overproduction of dopamine, and it just, I didn't really research this as much, but there's something called chlorpromazine, I think, and it binds to postsynaptic dopamine receptors, and it does not activate them. It blocks the ability of dopamine to activate them, and the blockage of dopamine receptors by chlorpromazine sends a feedback signal to the presynaptic neuron, which increases the release of dopamine. And when it releases, it breaks down the synapse, resulting in elevated levels of dopamine metabolites.
Alright, so what does dopamine do to us?
Makes us happy.
Makes us happy, so why is that a bad thing?
Because sometimes in excess, it can cause hallucinations, just like in schizophrenia.
Okay, so dopamine, because of their high levels of dopamine, that's what's leading to the bad characteristics,
Yeah.
okay? Alright, so you mentioned positive and negative symptoms. They're all not good symptoms, though, correct? So when you say a positive symptom, what does that really mean?
Positive is what is added to the person. So like, we normally don't have hallucinations or delusions or just thoughts that shouldn't be there. That's just what's added to the personality. And negative ones are just like, just taken away. So it's lack of social skills and not being able to communicate with people right, and just losing what you're supposed to have.
And all of that's because of the dopamine levels.
Yeah.
So if you're on medications, what does the medication try to stop?
It like, it just regulates the levels.
Levels of dopamine, so as it goes in and like attacks the dopamine so that you don't make enough, or you stops you from ever creating it?
It just evens out the production of it.
Okay, so that way everybody produces the same amount. Okay. One last thing, why is it that we don't see schizophrenia until after someone's gone through puberty?
Because
Like, why is it teenagers that you don't see it until they, I mean, why can't a 3 or 4 year old be, have
It's
schizophrenia?
probably because of all the hormones, like just the influx of hormones, just like at one point in time. And also it occurs after like stressful situations, like a person may have it, but it's just kind of like dormant until like something bad happens, like really traumatic, and it just like triggers it.
it's because of synaptic pruning. It occurs during puberty, and when there's like an excess of synaptic pruning, then that's what causes it.
Yeah, I was reading and it said that, I like the way this guy, I forget where, it was Rutgers or something like that, they made the comment, they said that when a kid goes through puberty, their brain changes. And when their brain changes, that's why schizophrenia all of a sudden will become more